Hi everybody. Now this is again another chapter of The Fields of Home. This is especially for Bert and Cora halfway around the world in China, and for Katie and Susanna here in the USA. Now, and anybody else who wants to listen and watch. Chapter 9. Uncle Levi teaches me to swing a scythe. As I unharnessed old Nell, I told myself that after my promise to Mrs. Littlehill, it wouldn't be honest of me to leave Grandfather till he had all his hay in. But all the time, I knew I was going to stay because I liked to work with Uncle Levi. The box he'd brought from the village was nowhere in sight when I hurried back to the carriage house, but he was down on his hands and knees, rolling the other package way back under the workbench. "Screen wire for Millie," he said when he looked up and saw me. "Flies in the house like to drive her crazy. Been yammering at me for going on 5-6 years. But with one thing and another, when I've been down, I never got around to making them. If the horse rake doesn't take any longer than I think it will, maybe we can start on them tomorrow," I said. Mayhaps, another way of saying maybe. But first, we got to see what we can do with Thomas. He ain't going to sit around here peaceable while we're fixing up that horse rake. Thomas, he don't cotton the machinery. Wouldn't have that cussed old rattle-trap of a mowing machine around here if he could hire hand mowers. Good scythemen is getting hard to find. "He has quite a little trouble keeping any kind of men, doesn't he?" I asked. For the first time, Uncle Levi looked at me as if he was peeved. Before he answered, he shoved the roll of screen wire to the farthest corner under the bench and climbed to his feet. By the time he was up, he seemed more sad than mad. He reached one hand out, laid it on my shoulder, but instead of looking at me, he looked out across the fields. "Thomas never learnt to get along with other folks," he said at last. "'Tain't that he don't like 'em, Ralphie. He does. There ain't a man living with more love in him than what Thomas has. Worshipped father to the longest day he lived. No man ever loved the land more'n Thomas loves this old farm, every stone and stump of it. You've seen him with critters, tender as any woman, but he has a devilish hard time showing it to people. A cross-grain in the timber someplace. Treats worse, them he likes best. Ain't you heard him jaw and row at Millie?" "She jaws and rows at him just about as bad," I said. "Huh, being round Thomas, it gets to be a habit. There's times it's tannish and hard not to row back at him." I knew that, but I didn't want to say it, so I said, "I don't think Millie likes anybody but you very well." "Millie," he said, "why do you calculate she's put up with Thomas all these years? Millie don't like strangers. Fetched up that way. Her mother lived like a hermit, way up on Rocky Dundee, the other side of Lisbon Village." "Was her father a hermit too?" I asked. "Don't nobody know. Her mother married a man off to Portland when Millie come to work for Thomas." Uncle Levi jerked his hand down off my shoulder. "Great day of judgment," he said. "Here we stand gossiping like a pair of widow women. This ain't mending hand sweeps, is it? Mark them pieces of clear pine racked up beneath the ceiling? Them's for Millie's screen frames. Had 'em all ripped out, ready to put together 4, 5, 6 years now." He chuckled a few notes behind his mustache. "Have to devil her a little about the flies come dinner time." Before we started on the hand sweeps, Uncle Levi fished a ring of keys out of his overalls pocket and unhooked the drawers on the right-hand side of the workbench. The top two were filled with tools. There was a place made for each one, and they were all in their places. Every metal part was covered with a film of oil. There wasn't a rust spot anywhere. The two lower drawers were divided into sections with sliding trays, and each section held a different size of nut, bolt, screw, or washer. "Have to keep 'em locked up," he told me, "else Thomas would have 'em scattered from Dan to Beersheba. It's a God's wonder when he can lay his hand on a wrench, drops 'em wherever he uses 'em. Got 4, 5, half a dozen, planted in every cussed field on the place. Now you can go cutting shanks on these teeth if you've a mind to, while I turn 'em down with a spoke shave. Set your calipers a right big in the hole so they'll fit good and snug." I felt terrible when I had to say, "I'm sorry, but I don't know what calipers are." "Little fellow there in the top drawer," he told me. "Looks like a bow-legged cowboy. That's the one. Open and close the spraddle with that little burr nut on the side. That's the ticket. Set it just a right big in the holes in the sweep rail." As soon as I saw it, I remembered that Father used to have one like it in his tool chest. I could remember having seen him use it before I ever started school. He'd made an old sewing machine over into a wood lathe with a big flywheel and spindles. When he turned things on it, he used to measure them with a caliper. As I set the width of the hole, I could see that old lathe of Father's as plainly as if I'd been looking back 10 days instead of 10 years. The flywheel was big, almost like a grindstone. He got it going fast with the foot treadles before he began to cut with the chisels. Could remember his making Mother a whatnot with it. I'd stepped back from the hand sweep and was looking at Grandfather's grindstone when Uncle Levi asked, "What's biting you, Ralphie? What are you trying to figure out?" "Nothing," I said. "I was just remembering about a wood lathe Father once built out of an old sewing machine. It had a flywheel that looked like a grindstone. He'd get it turning real fast with the foot treadles, then he'd turn out any shape he wanted with a chisel." "Huh," Uncle Levi said, and came over and gave the grindstone handle a twist. Then he shut one eye and watched it as it twirled around. "Huh," he said again. "'Pears to run pretty even. There's turtles around for it someplace. Thomas never uses them. Never grinds nothing, less than some poor devil to turn the crank." He looked along the wall over the top of his glasses. "There they be. Suppose we set it spinning and see how true the center runs." We put the treadles on. I got the stone whirling as fast as I could make my feet go. "True as gospel," Uncle Levi said as he squinted at it. "So long as you don't push it too hard and make it gallop. Let me see now. About all we're going to need is a dead center and a spring to hold it up close again. I'll file that bolt end into a hole chuck while you hunt a spring. Get a good stout one, about 6 or 8 inches long." Within an hour, we'd rigged a little makeshift lathe onto the grindstone. Worked fine for the hand sweep teeth. Uncle Levi was careful to make every one of them just alike. After he'd calipered one of the shanks, he looked at me and said, "Charlie must have been a pretty good mechanic." "He was," I said. "Father could make anything he wanted to out of anything he had." "Calculate you take after him," he said, and ran the chisel smoothly along the piece of kindling as he shaped the tooth. If he'd asked me right then to jump off the peak of the barn, I'd have been glad to do it for him. We had the hand sweeps fixed just as good as new when Millie called dinner, and it was a good dinner too, with a big piece of corned beef, boiled potatoes, cabbage, johnny cake, and another apple pie. It was a hot day, the windows were open, there were quite a few flies in the kitchen. Well, there's a picture of them, sitting in the kitchen to eat dinner. There's Grandfather, Ralph, Uncle Levi, and Millie standing up in the background. And the rooster jumped up on the windowsill. Huh. Let's see now. We weren't any more than down at the table before Uncle Levi began swatting at them, chewing them off the corned beef. "Great day of judgment," he snapped, as if they were worrying him to death. "Flies so tinish and thick around here, manners will blow his victuals off before the flies does." "Millie, it's a God's wonder you wouldn't spread a little molasses on a piece of brown paper. Catch these pesky things. How's a man going to enjoy his victuals when he daren't open his mouth for fear of getting a fly in it?" Then he turned his head so he could wink at me without her seeing him. "Molasses, huh!" Millie snapped right back at him. "How many hogsheads of molasses?" Now, hogshead is a giant-sized barrel made tight enough to hold liquid. We got a couple of them out here in the barn, if you remember, Bert. "How many hogsheads of molasses you calculate it would take to catch all the devilish flies in Lisbon Township? Ain't nothing to stop them coming in here, is there? It's your own cussed fault if you don't like flies. Where's them screens you been promised me ever since I come to this infernal fly trap?" "Fly trap!" Grandfather exploded. "Who says it's a fly trap? This house ain't never had a screen on it, and for more than 100 years it's been good enough for all the other women folk that's lived in it. Screens, huh, down old nuisances. Won't have 'em. Won't have 'em, I tell you. This house ain't good enough for you just like it is. Go somewhere else. Screens, huh." Grandfather's rowing must have made the old red rooster curious. He flew up onto the windowsill, still behind Uncle Levi, twisted his head from side to side as he looked around the kitchen. I didn't want to wrangle about screens to go any further, so I said, "We've got a visitor." "Great day of judgment," Uncle Levi sang out as he turned toward the rooster. "By hub, there's one smart critter on the place. first day I've been here, and already he knows there's something more than salt pork on the table. Ain't nothing the matter with salt pork, Grandfather snapped, but I noticed he'd taken a good big slice of corned beef. Ain't nothing the matter with bread and water, Uncle Levi said as he cut a little piece of corned beef, spread hot mustard on it. But it's devilish poor belly stuffing for men in a hayfield. They be, Beelzebub. That'll put her curly in tail feathers. The old rooster leaned forward and grabbed the piece of corned beef off the end of Uncle Levi's fork. It was a small mouthful for a man, but a big one for a rooster. He had to make 2 tries to swallow it, and each time he ran his neck out like a goose reaching through a fence. Then he cocked his head to one side, clicked his bill, so it sounded almost exactly the way Uncle Levi's lips had when he looked at the breakfast, and shook his head like a dog with water in its ears. For a minute he stood blinking his eyes, as if he were trying to make up his mind whether the corned beef was worth the mustard. Then he turned toward the hens in the dooryard and called tuck, 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 before Millie brought the pie. Before Millie brought the pie, Uncle Levi had fed the rooster a dozen pieces or more of corned beef. He put a good dollop of hot mustard on every one of them, but nobody mentioned screens again. We had a pretty good afternoon working in the orchard. Grandfather scolded me 2 or 3 times for being awkward or slow. Most of the time, Uncle Levi kept me working with him. We took both sides and the 3 hand sweeps with us. But Grandfather didn't use the sweeps very much. When we climbed over the stone wall from the pasture lane, he was as excited as a racehorse at the starting point. By gory, Ralphie, he called out, I and you will show him what kind of logs makes wide shingles. Come on, Levi. We'll... Rushy, please.
Oh, sorry.
Rusty's telephone rang.
Good morning.
We'll get her all in the window before supper time. He dropped aside the long grass by the wall, grabbed one of the sweeps I had over my shoulder, and began flinging hay like a hen scratching for corn. Uncle Levi didn't say anything, but picked up Grandfather's scythe, kept walking slowly toward the nearest tree. I didn't know just what I ought to do, but I wanted to be with Uncle Levi, so I started to follow him. I'd only gone a few yards when Grandfather called, Ralphie, Ralphie, time flies. Pitch in here alongside of me. I should have watched to see how Grandfather was handling the sweep, but I didn't. They looked to me like little horse rakes. I had supposed that you'd drag them the same way, so I set mine down at the edge of the field and began pulling it along. What in tarnation you trying to do now? Grandfather yelled after me. Play hoss? Get your backsides behind you and go at it man fashion. Made me madder to have him scold me when Uncle Levi was there than when we were alone. My whole head felt as if it were catching a fire, and I had just snapped out, I'm not, when Uncle Levi called, Thomas, grass under these trees is still green and a gourd. Tomorrow's the Sabbath, and if it ain't got out where the sun can get at it, it'll sour on the ground before Monday. Tain't no wonder, Grandfather called back as he dropped his sweep and almost ran toward the trees. Ralphie mowed under that one. He wobbed all the grass all up into hog wallows. Never seen a boy so helpless with a snath and scythe. Unless I dragged it, I was about as helpless with a hen sweep as with a scythe. But while Grandfather and Uncle Levi stood talking under the apple tree, I did the best I could. After a few minutes, they walked on to another tree or 2. Then Grandfather took his scythe, hurried off to some trees that we hadn't mowed under at the far side of the orchard. He hadn't been gone 2 minutes before Uncle Levi called, Ralphie. His voice was just loud enough to reach me. I put my sweep on my shoulder and went over where he was. He wasn't hurrying at all. He sort of rolled from side to side as he stepped forward, and his arms and the big rake moved back and forth in perfect rhythm. After a little while, he noticed me watching him. And said, Slow and steady goes far in a day, Ralphie. Thomas, he's a fast starter, but he peters out tall real quick. One of these cussed things that's a waste of time to hurry. Take care, Thomas, don't set you too fast a pace, Ralphie. You ain't had all your growth yet. I was 3 or 4 inches taller than Uncle Levi, and I didn't like being called Ralphie. Couldn't come out and say so. I thought that gave me a pretty good chance to drop a little hint, so I said, I'm 14 and a half now, but I guess Grandfather thinks I'm still a little boy. He always calls me Ralphie. Then I picked up my hand sweep and swung it, just as near as I could the way Uncle Levi was doing. He stopped raking as soon as I had started, and stood, leaning on the handle of his sweep and watching me. You're lucky. Storekeeper told Father he'd give me a suit of clothes when I growed up if they'd name me Levi. I've been wearing the cussed name for 64 years, but I never did get the suit of clothes. A couple of minutes later, he said, "Getting the hang of that sweep pretty good, ain't you, Ralph? It's slow and easy that does it." "Well, it's still kind of awkward," I said, "but I guess I can get it. It's a scythe that I can't learn to use." "Don't know about that," Uncle Levi told me. "Appears to me you would learn most anything you had a mind to. That is, if you didn't rear into it too hard. Supposing you let me see you try it." On the first swing, the blade tangled in the grass and jerked to a stop. "I could do it better with a left-handed scythe," I said. "I've always been left-handed." "Got to learn either way," Uncle Levi told me. "Might just as well learn right-handed in the first place. There's a devilish lot more right-handed scythes in the world than there is left-handed ones. Devilish lot more right-handed people, too. Ain't never a bad idea to learn to do things the way most other folks does them. Leave me have hold of that cussed thing a minute." I stood back and watched while Uncle Levi mowed a strip 10 or 12 feet long. "Take note you don't hold a snath so's the scythe is straight out from you like the row of teeth on a hand sweep. Keep the point of the blade close into you all the while. Leave your wrists go a trifle loose and it won't heist up so much on the ends of the swing. I ain't good at this myself, but sometime you watch Thomas when he ain't out to set you a pace. Father bent him a little snath and learned him to mow before he was belly high to a bull. Ain't many men can best Thomas at anything Father learned him to do. Now you try your hand at it a spell." Uncle Levi never told me I was awkward. He never scolded. He just followed along beside me for 10 or 15 minutes, showed me where I was making mistakes. "Don't reach too far neither way. Get your tail end around towards the sun so you can keep an eye on that shadow and watch that your head don't swing. Don't try to hold your behind still. Let it travel as much as it's a mind to. Turn that right hand down so you can only see the knuckles as it goes up a pass in front of you. That holds the point down, keeps the stubble even. Roll your right thumb up when you want to heist the blade over a rock. You're trying too hard. Ease up a dite and fetch it across with a limber wrist. There, that's more like it. Take note how the scythe point's hugging along the ground. By hub, you got the trick of it now, Ralph." I still couldn't mow anything like the way Grandfather and Uncle Levi could, but the scythe didn't get stuck anymore. I wasn't hitting the stones. Cut them hogs in the bandsaw, an armful of clover every night. "'Twon't be long before you can swing a scythe as good as any man," Uncle Levi told me. "We better get back to raking now. First thing we know, we'll have Thomas over here raising ructions. Like as not, the way he started off, he's mowed under half a dozen trees by now." Grandfather had finished mowing under his 4th tree when we went back to our rakes, but he was nowhere in sight. His hand sweep was still in the corner of the orchard, where he'd dropped it. His scythe was laid up on the stone wall by the gateway. "Never seen a man just like Thomas," Uncle Levi said, as he picked up his sweep. "Works in fits and starts. Rears into it like a gale of wind for half, maybe 3/4 of an hour. Then he's off to tend the bees or look what's come in the mailbox. He'll be here and gone half a dozen times before the day is over." Uncle Levi was just right about Grandfather. We never saw him leave, but 2 or 3 times we saw him coming back across the field from the barn. He'd pick up his scythe, mow into 3 or 4 more trees, then disappear. Twice he stopped by a tree where we were working, and both times he told me we'd never get finished till snow flew if I didn't stop my dawdling. Each time, as soon as Grandfather had left us. Uncle Levi told me that slow and steady went far in a day. And by the time the sun dipped down behind the pine woods on the ridge, we'd finished raking under the last tree in the orchard. At supper time, it was easy to see that Grandfather was pretty well tired out. We had red flannel hash, potatoes, beets, carrots, and cabbage, chopped up with the corned beef that was left from dinner, and fried till it was dark reddish brown on both sides. Grandfather took just a little dab on his plate. He only ate a mouthful or 2, till Uncle Levi bought his bottle, and Millie made a hot toddy. He grumbled about not needing it, the same as he had the night before, but he took it, and he ate a pretty good supper afterwards. When I came in from milking, Grandfather had his feet in the oven, and Uncle Levi was reading the Lewiston Sunday paper. He had his glasses balanced on the end of his nose, was leaning back in his rocker with both feet up on the hot water tank of the stove. Grandfather was nodding, half asleep, when I took the sports page of the paper and sat down at the kitchen table to read it. Uncle Levi kept interrupting every few minutes. At first it was about somebody's funeral, or a baby being born, or about a horse running away. Then as he turned the pages over, it was ads for things people wanted to sell. A live goose feather bed, a chest of drawers, or a 2-row cultivator. After each of the first few items, Grandfather would say, "Too bad, ain't it?" or "Who be they? Never heard tell of 'em." But after a while, his head didn't even bob, and every now and then he'd snore a few notes. I'd stopped hearing the stuff myself until suddenly Uncle Levi asked in a good loud voice, "What kind of bees is black belts, Thomas?" Grandfather's head came up with a snap. "Black belts? Black belts? Best tannel bee there is. What about 'em?" "Oh, nothing," Uncle Levi told him as he turned the page. "Just seen an idea where somebody wants to trade off a couple of colonies of 'em for a heifer calf. Don't calculate they could amount to much if he'd trade 'em for a heifer calf." "Where does he live at? Leave me see that paper," Grandfather snapped and pulled his feet out of the oven. "Way off the other side of Lewiston," Uncle Levi told him. Went right on looking at the paper. "'Tain't worth looking at, Thomas. Take a man 3-4 hours to drive over there, and like as not he'd find the bees was traded off before he got there. Pass me that paper. Pass me that paper, Levi. Where in tarnation did I leave my spectacles?" I got Grandfather's glasses from the mantel. As I gave them to him, Uncle Levi passed over the paper. One of his eyelids flickered just a trifle as he looked past my face. Grandfather buried his head in the outstretched paper for a minute or two, then glanced up at the clock. "Gory sakes alive. Time flies. Come on, Levi. It's time all honest folks were abed." And that's the end of that chapter.
Wow.
Looks like Uncle Levi found a way to get rid of Thomas for the next day, doesn't it? We'll see what happens. Okay. Bye, everybody.